What would make a billionaire's daughter walk away from a life of luxury and privilege to become a school teacher? Would you give up everything you've ever known to follow your heart? Meet Isabel Montgomery, daughter of one of the richest men in the world. At 28, she had everything anyone could dream of: wealth, beauty, and status. But she gave it all up to pursue a humble teaching career. However, when her final day in the classroom arrived, what her students did for her left everyone speechless. You won't believe how this unexpected act of kindness transformed Isabel's life forever. Isabel Montgomery had lived a life that most people could only dream of. Born into a family of immense wealth, she was accustomed to private jets, luxury cars, and lavish parties. Her father, Richard Montgomery, was a tech mogul worth billions, with his own sprawling mansion perched atop a hill overlooking the city. Isabel's childhood had been one of privilege, where everything she could ever want was handed to her on a silver platter. But as she grew older, Isabel began to feel a void in her life. Surrounded by wealth, she never felt truly connected to anyone or anything. Her friends seemed more interested in material things than real connections, and her family, though loving, was caught up in the whirlwind of their fortune. The social events, the brand-name clothes, the exclusive dinners, it all felt hollow. At the age of 26, after years of living in the fast lane, Isabel made a decision that shocked everyone, including her father. She walked away from the life she knew and enrolled in college to pursue a teaching degree. She chose to live modestly, renting a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood, far from the high-rise buildings and designer stores of her old world. Isabel's father had tried to convince her to stay in the family business, offering her endless opportunities and a life that most people would kill for. But Isabel couldn't be swayed. She wanted to make a difference in the world, and she felt that teaching was the only way she could do that. The students at her new school, however, were not at all impressed with her last name or her seemingly perfect life. Isabel was no longer the girl with the golden touch. She was just another teacher trying to make a living and help the next generation succeed. Her students came from tough backgrounds, where poverty, broken homes, and crime were common. Many of them didn't have parents who cared about their education, and the classroom was often the only place they felt safe. Isabel's first year teaching was anything but easy. She was met with resistance, indifference, and even mockery. Some students teased her for not understanding the struggles they faced, while others doubted her sincerity, thinking she was just another rich girl playing at being a teacher. But over time, something changed. Isabel's sincerity, passion, and genuine care for her students began to shine through. She took the time to get to know each one of them, learning about their dreams and fears, their challenges and triumphs. Her students, who initially dismissed her as someone who could never understand their lives, began to open up to her. Isabel never tried to change them. Instead, she encouraged them to see their potential and to push through the obstacles in their way. She made her classroom a place where they could not only learn, but also grow. Slowly but surely, she won them over, one by one. But as her final day of teaching approached, Isabel had no idea that her students were planning something that would leave her forever changed. The school year had been a success, but Isabel felt a sense of bittersweet finality. She had poured her heart into her work, and now it was time to say goodbye. However, her students had something truly remarkable in mind to show their appreciation and to prove that they too had learned something valuable from her. Little did Isabel know, her last day in the classroom would turn into an unforgettable experience that would change her life forever. Rising action. Isabel Montgomery had always been driven by a sense of purpose, but her purpose as a teacher was constantly tested. The challenges she faced in the classroom seemed endless, from unruly students to difficult parents, and the vast gap between her privileged background and the reality her students faced. The school she worked at was located in a gritty part of the city, an area where drug violence was rampant and families often struggled to make ends meet. Despite these challenges, Isabel threw herself into her work with determination. But the road to gaining the trust of her students had been a long and winding one, filled with moments of self-doubt and frustration. It all began with the student who tested her the most, Tyler. A rebellious 16-year-old with a chip on his shoulder, Tyler came from a broken home. His mother worked 2 jobs just to pay the bills, and his father was in prison. Tyler was the epitome of what Isabel had been warned about, the kind of student who couldn't care less about school and had little hope for the future. From the first day he entered Isabel's classroom, he made his disdain for education clear. He skipped class regularly, was frequently caught smoking in the school's back alley, and made a habit of mocking Isabel's attempts to connect with him. "Why do you even care about us?" he asked one day when she tried to talk to him after class. "You have a perfect life, don't you? You get to live in a fancy house and have everything handed to you. What could you possibly know about real problems?" His words hit Isabel hard, and for a brief moment, she questioned her decision to leave behind the comforts of her old life. Maybe Tyler was right. Maybe she couldn't understand what it was like to struggle, to go without. But she refused to let him break her resolve. "Tyler, I may not have your experiences, but I do know how important it is to fight for what you want. I can help you find a way to move forward, but you have to show up for yourself first." Tyler scowled, brushing her off with a grunt and walking away. She knew she had made little impact that day, but she wasn't willing to give up. Over the weeks, she continued to check in on him, asking about his homework, offering encouragement, and refusing to let him get lost in the system. But despite her best efforts, Tyler continued to push her away. Then there was Maria, a bright young girl with a natural talent for art. However, Maria's home life was tumultuous at best. Her father was abusive, and she often came to school bruised and withdrawn. Isabel had noticed the signs, but had been unsure of how to approach the situation. The first time Maria opened up to her, it wasn't through words, but through a painting she brought to class one morning. A beautiful, haunting portrayal of a woman with broken wings. The image struck Isabel deeply. She knew Maria was telling her something, but the girl never spoke of it. Isabel approached her cautiously after class. "Maria," she said softly, "I think your painting says a lot. I think you're saying that you feel trapped, aren't you?" Maria's eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't speak. Isabel, understanding that her student wasn't ready for a full conversation, simply wrapped her arm around Maria's shoulders and let her cry. "You don't have to carry this alone," Isabel whispered. But even as she connected with her students in ways she had never imagined, Isabel was faced with an internal struggle. She had been raised to believe that money and success were the keys to happiness. Yet, she was increasingly torn between the life she had once known and the simple, humbling life she was now leading. She missed the comforts of her old life, the luxury, the security, but there was a part of her that had never felt more fulfilled than when she was standing in front of her class, imparting lessons that could change the course of her students' lives. One of the most painful moments for Isabel came when she received an invitation to a gala hosted by her father. It was one of those high society events she had once attended with ease, complete with diamond-encrusted jewelry, expensive champagne, and the finest food. Her father had been sending her subtle hints for weeks, urging her to come back to the family business, to attend the gala, to be a part of the world she had left behind. The invitation was a reminder of everything she had sacrificed. As she stood in her tiny apartment, holding the invitation in her hand, she felt the familiar pull of temptation. The world she had left behind seemed so much easier, so much more glamorous than the one she was building in the classroom. She thought of her father's disapproving glances when she first told him of her decision, of his worry that she would never be enough without her inheritance, without the Montgomery name. He had tried to convince her that she could change the world with the wealth and influence at her disposal, but Isabel was no longer convinced. That evening, she found herself at a crossroads. Should she return to the life she had known, or should she continue down the path she had chosen? The thought of facing her students, knowing that she might be abandoning them for her former life, left a bitter taste in her mouth. They had become her family, and she knew they relied on her. Isabel's conflict was deeper than ever before. She didn't just want to teach. She wanted to prove that her life could have meaning outside the confines of her wealth. But as her last day at the school approached, things took an unexpected turn. During a parent-teacher meeting, she received a devastating phone call from her father's lawyer. There had been an issue with the family's estate, and her father had made a decision that would change Isabel's future forever. Without her consent, he had arranged for her inheritance to be distributed among several charitable organizations without her input. The lawyer, a stern and distant man, told her the news with no warmth or apology. "Miss Montgomery, your father has decided to redirect your inheritance to causes he deems fit. Your personal wealth will be largely absorbed into the family's charitable foundation." Isabel was stunned, not just by the cold nature of her father's actions, but by the realization that he hadn't even asked for her opinion. The wealth she had once expected to inherit was now out of her hands, and she had no choice but to accept the situation. The pain of betrayal, though subtle, was sharp. It was as though her father had finally written off her choices, seeing her decision to leave the family business and teach as a failure. But as Isabel wiped away her tears, she felt a sense of clarity wash over her. For the first time, she realized that she had nothing to prove. She wasn't defined by the money in her bank account or her family's name. The truth was, she was exactly where she was meant to be, standing at the front of a classroom, shaping the future of the students who had come to rely on her. And so, Isabel made a promise to herself. She would continue teaching no matter the cost. She would prove that her worth was not tied to the legacy of her father, but to the impact she had on the lives of her students. The final day in the classroom was drawing near, but Isabel was ready for the next chapter of her life, whatever it might bring. Climax. The day Isabel Montgomery had been dreading had finally arrived. Her last day as a teacher at the community school that had become her sanctuary. It was an odd feeling, a mix of relief, sadness, and uncertainty. The end of her teaching journey was bittersweet. She had spent the last 2 years transforming not only her students' lives but her own, and now she was being pushed into a new chapter that felt unfamiliar and daunting. Yet, despite everything, she was resolute. She would not let this be the end of her impact. Isabel had learned to make a difference without the need for wealth, status, or prestige. Her students had shown her the true meaning of purpose. The classroom was filled with energy, yet it felt heavy, like the final notes of a song about to play its last chord. Isabel had told her students this would be her last day, but she could tell that they had sensed something much deeper than the usual end-of-the-year excitement. They had grown attached to her. To them, she was more than just a teacher. Isabel had become a symbol of hope, of change, and even, in a way, of a dream they never knew they could reach. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the day and the end of her tenure at the school, Isabel closed her eyes, allowing herself one final moment of reflection. The sun streamed through the open windows, casting long shadows across the desks where her students had sat. She felt the weight of their gaze upon her. It was the end, but something deep inside told her it wasn't quite over. Not yet. Isabel, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Tyler, the rebellious teen who had challenged her at every turn in the beginning. He had been one of her hardest students to reach, but they had formed a bond over the months. Tyler walked up to her desk with an unreadable expression. Isabel had seen him angry, cynical, and even indifferent, but now his face showed something different. His eyes were softer, almost vulnerable. "I just wanted to say thanks," Tyler said, his voice quiet, unsure. It wasn't a typical thanks from a student. It was more, something that carried the weight of months of struggle, change, and growth. Isabel looked up at him, not knowing what to say. Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and sadness. This was the moment she had been working toward. The moment Tyler, a kid who thought the world owed him nothing, recognized the impact she had made in his life. Before she could respond, the door to the classroom swung open, and Maria walked in, holding a small envelope. Maria, the shy and talented artist, had been a quiet observer of the changes unfolding in the class. Her own struggles at home had kept her withdrawn for much of the year, but in her final months, Isabel had seen her blossom into someone who could stand up for herself, someone who believed in her own worth. "Ms. Montgomery, I have something for you," Maria said, her voice trembling. She handed Isabel the envelope with a soft smile. Isabel opened it, surprised to find a letter from all her students. It wasn't just a letter. It was a collection of stories, drawings, and messages, each one a testimony of how much she had impacted them. The words were simple, but filled with love. "Thank you for showing me that I'm not invisible. You made me believe in my future. Because of you, I'm not afraid anymore. You gave me hope when I thought it was all gone." Isabel blinked back tears. This was the moment, the one that made every sacrifice, every struggle, and every second spent in the classroom worthwhile. The students who had once been indifferent to her presence, who had once doubted her sincerity, now saw her not just as their teacher, but as someone who had genuinely cared for them. But before Isabel could process the emotions flooding her heart, there was another knock on the door. This time, it was Mr. Carter, the school principal. He looked unusually serious, his brow furrowed, his usual confident demeanor replaced with something else, something unsettling. "Isabel, may I have a word?" he asked, his voice low. "Of course, Mr. Carter," she replied, her heart suddenly heavy with an unease she couldn't shake. As they stepped out into the hallway, Mr. Carter closed the door behind them, casting a shadow over the classroom. Isabel felt the shift in the air, and she instinctively knew that this wasn't just a casual conversation. "I need to inform you of something," Mr. Carter began. "There's been an issue with the school's funding. The district has decided to reduce financial support for some of our extracurricular programs. Unfortunately, that includes the art program that Maria and a few others have been so passionate about." Isabel's heart sank. She knew how important the art program was to Maria, how it gave her an outlet for expression and healing. The thought of it being cut felt like a punch to the gut. But what hurt even more was the realization that the school had not done enough to protect its most vulnerable programs. Isabel had worked hard to build something meaningful for her students, but now, with this news, it felt as if everything she had built was crumbling away. "Is there any way we can fight this?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the situation. "I'm afraid not," Mr. Carter said, his voice apologetic but resigned. "The decision is final." Isabel was stunned. She had been so focused on her students that she hadn't seen the bureaucratic forces at play. In her heart, she knew that Maria's dreams, and the dreams of many other students, were now at risk of being crushed. She felt a surge of anger, not toward Mr. Carter, but toward the system, toward everything that had allowed this to happen. She had always believed that leaving her wealthy life behind had made her a better person. But now, standing in front of this injustice, Isabel realized that perhaps she had been naive. She had been trying to build a life that mattered, one student at a time, but the forces that ruled the world outside her classroom were still as ruthless as ever. But then, something unexpected happened. As Isabel stood in the hallway, grappling with the weight of the moment, she heard a noise behind her. The classroom door creaked open and the students, every single one of them, walked into the hallway. Tyler, Maria, and the rest of the class, their faces determined, their eyes filled with resolve. "What are you all doing?" Isabel asked, confused and overwhelmed. "We're fighting for the art program," Tyler said, his voice fierce. "You taught us how to fight for what's right. We're not letting it go without a fight." The students had rallied together, organized by Tyler of all people. They had started a petition, spoken with parents, and contacted local news stations. They had taken action, not for their own benefit, but for Maria, for themselves, and for every student who came after them. Isabel was overwhelmed with emotion as she watched her students step forward, showing the same courage she had tried to instill in them. The fight was no longer just about a teacher helping her students. It was a fight for justice, for equality, and for a better future. In that moment, Isabel knew what she had to do. This wasn't just her fight anymore. She had planted the seeds, but now it was her students who had risen to the challenge. Isabel joined them, and together they fought for what they believed in. As the final bell rang, signaling the end of her last day as a teacher, Isabel realized that she had found her true purpose, not just in the classroom, but in the fight for what was right. The students who had walked into her life were now her equals, and together they would change the world. The weeks following that fateful day were a whirlwind. What started as a seemingly insurmountable battle to save the art program turned into a movement. Isabel's students, once unsure of their power, had discovered the strength of unity. The petition they started gained traction. Local news outlets picked up the story, and within days, the community rallied behind them. Parents, teachers, and even former alumni reached out, signing petitions and attending meetings, voicing their support for the arts program that had brought so much joy and hope to students like Maria. Isabel watched as her students transformed. Tyler, who had once been a reluctant student, now stood before the school board, passionately arguing for the importance of the arts in education. Maria, who had always been shy, now led after-school art projects, helping younger students express themselves. Isabel had taught them that their voices mattered, and in return, they showed her that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in the ability to inspire and uplift others. After a tense few weeks, the school board reversed their decision. The art program would continue, and with it, the dreams of countless students. Isabel couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride, not just for her students, but for herself. She had chosen to walk away from everything she knew to make a difference, and now she was living proof that even one person can create lasting change. Her time at the school wasn't just a chapter in her life. It had become the foundation of something much bigger. Isabel had not only found her purpose, but she had found a community, a family, built not on wealth, but on compassion, resilience, and shared dreams. She had shown her students that success wasn't measured by how much you had, but by what you could give. And in return, they had taught her more than she could have ever imagined about courage, selflessness, and the power of a single act of defiance. As Isabel prepared to leave the school for good, she stood in front of her class one last time. Tyler, Maria, and the rest of her students gathered around her, their faces filled with admiration and gratitude. They had transformed together, each one of them now more confident, more hopeful, and more determined than they had ever been. Isabel smiled, a quiet satisfaction settling in her heart. "You all have taught me as much as I've taught you," she said, her voice full of emotion. "And I promise you this, you are capable of anything. Keep fighting for what's right, and never let anyone tell you your dreams are too big." As she walked out of the classroom, she didn't look back. Isabel knew that her journey as a teacher had shaped her in ways she had never expected. The lesson she had learned, and that she had imparted to her students, was simple but powerful. No matter where you come from, you can make a difference. Success is not defined by wealth or fame, but by the impact you have on the lives of others. The world may not always be kind or fair, but through compassion, kindness, and a willingness to fight for what matters, change is possible. And Isabel, once a billionaire's daughter, had proven that the greatest treasures in life aren't found in money or possessions. They are found in the people you touch and the lives you change.